Senator Ketter.
Very much, Mr Acting Deputy President. I rise tonight to oppose the so-called Social Services Legislation Amendment Fair and Sustainable Pensions Bill 2015, a title which George Orwell would be quite proud of. Tonight's bill is brought to the chamber courtesy of broken promises and a grubby deal with another political party. The broken promises are legion with this government, and we know that in the lead-up to the last election, the Prime Minister promised on 9 separate occasions that there would be no changes to the pension. And one would have thought that the people of Australia could have taken him at his word, given that he repeated that promise on 9 separate occasions. But no, the Prime Minister cannot be trusted on this particular issue. And of course the Greens political party are complicit in this exercise, and it's quite an appalling breach of trust on the part of the Greens in this area. And I understand that the Coalition and the Greens have joined forces to shut down a Senate inquiry nearly 2 months before it was due to report, and this report would have allowed proper scrutiny of the Abbott Government's cuts to the pension. And the Greens and the government have teamed up to sell out pensioners. And these changes, of course, aren't due to come into effect until 2017. So there is an interesting point as to why the government and the Greens are so afraid to have their pension cuts properly scrutinised. Now, it appears that the Greens are implicitly agreeing that the pension system is unsustainable, and we know that that is not the case, and we know that Australia is considered to have one of the most sustainable pensions in the world, and the Allianz Pension Sustainability Index last year found that Australia's pension system is the most sustainable in the world. According to the OECD, Australia spends just 3.5% of GDP on the aged pension, compared with the OECD average of 7.8%. Ensuring the continued sustainability of the retirement income system is important, but has to be done in a fair and equitable way. It would appear to me that the Greens have been sold a pup, with all due respect to the member for Fairfax. We know that while the increase in the asset test free area ameliorates the impact of the doubling in the taper rate, it will not universally deliver increased pension payments for those with modest levels of assets due to the dual means test. And I know senators have spoken about this particular issue before me. But pensioners, and I paraphrase supplementary submission given by Industry Super Australia to the Senate Committee on Community Affairs, where they say that pensioners with assessable assets exceeding $1 million are not the target of this measure, as they constitute only 5% of the losers. So, in fact, 95% of those affected have assets less than this, including those with assets of as little as $300,000. And the Industry Super Australia analysis goes on to reveal that the measure will, by 2055, reduce the entire retirement incomes of 50% of single females, none of which will obtain a comfortable retirement, thanks to the Greens. It will also reduce the retirement incomes of 50% of single males, none of which will obtain a comfortable retirement, once again thanks to the Greens. And it will reduce the retirement incomes of 10% of couples, none of which will obtain a comfortable retirement, once again thanks to the Greens. And the increase in the free area has been proposed, as I say, to ameliorate the impact of the harsher assets test, taper, and this is supposed to argue that there is an increase in the overall fairness of the measure, because it will lead to some modest increases for those on modest levels of assets. And the Industry Super Australia modelling shows that this will be the case for some pensioners, but the outcomes will vary significantly. Some pensioners with low levels of assets will not obtain any increase. There have been claims made that all part pensioners with assets below the new threshold will be better off, and Industry Super Australia's modelling suggests that that is incorrect. And they say that looking at the dual means test leads us to the conclusion that the claims have been overstated, with the cameo tables being presented, potentially providing a misleading picture as to the effects of it. So, returning to the government's proposition, now when Mr Abbott told pensioners there would be no change to pensioners, they took him at his word, as I said earlier. But it would appear that pensioners are public enemy number one for this government, ably aided and abetted by the Greens. We know that last year the government sought to hit 3.5 million pensioners, and in one of the most savage attacks on Australian pensioners in living memory, the plan to cut indexation would have seen every single pensioner in the country left worse off. And within 10 years, this cut would have amounted to $80 per week. It would have seen a massive $23 billion ripped out of the pockets of Australian pensioners. That was a broken promise, and it would have pushed pensioners into poverty and hardship. So the Prime Minister has resigned from that position, but that is only thanks to Labor's staunch opposition to those changes from last year. But this time he still wants to rip $2.4 billion from the pockets of pensioners. Now, this is reprehensible. We know that under the current tax and transfer policy settings that we have in this country, regrettably, many Australians under the current arrangements will retire on incomes below a comfortable standard, according to the modelling that I was referring to earlier, prepared by Industry Super Australia and Rice Warner. And we know that Australia has a world-class superannuation system, but it's not matured to the level that we would all like. So that means that for all Australians retiring from now through to 2055, according to this modelling, about half will not achieve a comfortable retirement, taking into account the aged pension, superannuation income and income from wealth outside of super. And the current system is especially failing single women, as has been referred to earlier. Over 2/3 of single women aged 55 to 69 will retire on incomes below a comfortable standard. And we know that even younger women face a difficult future. More than half of women currently aged 25 to 29 will retire on incomes below a comfortable standard. So that's the current situation. It's less than ideal, but these measures that are before us tonight have the impact of making the current system even less fair than what it currently is. So the modelling that I've referred to shows that the changes will initially have a relatively small impact on existing pensioners, but the proportion of new retirees affected by the proposed changes will increase significantly over time, and over 40% of retired Australians will be adversely affected by the proposed aged pension cuts by 2055, according to the Rice Warner modelling. The report goes on to say that the proposed changes in the taper rate will amount to a 15% overall cut in the retirement income of some people who are on incomes below a comfortable standard, while people on higher incomes are largely unaffected. Women are especially harmed by the proposed changes, and under the proposal, 8 in 10 single women retiring in 2055 will do so on incomes below that needed for a comfortable living standard, an increase of 30%. The bill's negative effects on single women, according to the Rice Warner modelling, will hit those on fairly modest incomes. Women aged 55 to 59 will be affected from earnings above $46,220. Women aged 45 to 49 are affected from earnings above $40,568, and those aged 25 to 29 from earnings above $23,954. So these are dramatic impacts on those who can least afford the changes. So this is what the bill does, and as Labor senators before me tonight have commented, this bill is a cut to the pension for 330,000 pensioners. Now, one wonders why this government seeks to target pensioners so repeatedly. Some single pensioners will be $8,000 worse off because of this, and we know that a single person who owns their own home earning less than $25,000 in income will lose $8,200. A couple who own their own home, drawing down together $45,000 from super and other earnings, will lose around $11,400. That's this government putting their hands in the pocket and taking $1 out of every 5 of this particular group. So how is this fair? And how is it that the Greens could be so naive to agree to changes which are going to be so detrimental to Middle Australia? We know that when pensioners come to us, if this bill is passed, they know that not only will the Prime Minister's hands be in their pockets to take away their income, they will find in their pockets also the hands of the leadership of the Greens, who are so complicit in allowing this all to occur. So, according to the government, 236,000 pensioners will be on average $130 a fortnight worse off, and as Senator Brown has indicated earlier on, that's $3,380 a year. And we know that 91,000 pensioners will lose their pension altogether. This will leave them on average $190 a fortnight, or $4,940 a year worse off. So we know that this measure might spare some pensioners the pain of last year, but it will still have very serious negative impacts for pensioners. And according to independent analysis, within 10 years, half of all new retirees leaving the workforce will be impacted by this measure. And as I've said earlier, the government might have us believe, and it would appear that the Greens have tumbled into the mythology, that all of the pensioners that are affected are millionaires. We know that this is absolute rubbish, and I've been through those figures. Let's make no mistake about this. This is an attack on Middle Australia. And the independent modelling indicates that over the long run, the largest impacts will be felt by people currently earning below average incomes. Now, we know that this government is happy to put its hands in the pockets of pensioners and take thousands of dollars a year from them, but at the same time they're refusing to have a sensible look at the issue of millionaire superannuants. And we know that Labor has put forward a sensible and fair proposal, and we know that that's been costed at around $14 billion, so it's not fair to say that Labor opposes all measures to address the budget, but this is a government that wants to leave the millionaire superannuants unscathed and take thousands of dollars off pensioners who can least afford it. And they would rather, in the process, double the deficit to $35 billion whilst they're doing it. This shows that the government does not get fairness and they don't get fiscal rectitude. And they still don't get it that when you make a promise, you are supposed to keep it. Labor will be holding this government to their promises. That is what good oppositions do. Labor will fight this measure. We will stand with pensioners once again, and we'll take this fight to the election. Tony Abbott lied to the Australian people. He said there would be no changes to pensions. He cannot be trusted. We know that, Mr Acting Deputy President. The reality is Tony Abbott wants to cut the pension. He wants to take money from pensioners while protecting wealthy Australians. It's wrong, and only Labor will fight for the pension.
Thank you, Senator Ketter.